The humid air hung heavy, even for a late spring evening in Lahore. I sat by the open window, the sounds of the bustling street below a familiar symphony, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, across oceans and continents, in a place I'd only ever seen in flickering images and whispered stories. I was thinking of the vast, quiet landscapes of the American Midwest, of cornfields stretching to horizons that seemed to touch the stars. And I thought of him. They called it the Dust Bowl back then. A bitter wind carried the very land away, painting the sky sepia and despair across the faces of those who tilled the soil. But before the dust, before the desolation, there was a different kind of quiet. A quiet that settled deep into the bones of places like Harmony Creek, Nebraska. That's where I lived, on a farm that had seen 3 generations of my family wrestle bounty from the earth. My name is Thomas. I was a boy of 12, all gangly limbs and boundless curiosity when the sky above our farm fractured. It wasn't a lightning strike, not thunder. It was a soundless tear, a ripple in the fabric of the heavens, followed by a descent. Slow, deliberate, and utterly impossible. A craft, unlike anything crafted by human hands, fell from the twilight sky. It was smooth, dark, reflecting the dying sun in streaks of obsidian and burnt orange. It landed not with a crash, but a sigh, burying itself deep in the soft earth of our furthest pasture. The ground trembled, a deep thrumming that vibrated through my bare feet even in my bedroom. My father, a man forged of grit and stoicism, grabbed his rifle. My mother, her face pale, clutched my younger sister, Lily. But I felt a pull, a magnetic north in my soul. I slipped out of the house as my parents debated what to do, driven by an instinct I couldn't name. The scent of ozone hung thick in the air, mingling with the familiar smell of damp soil and growing corn. As I drew closer, the craft seemed to shimmer, a silent behemoth. A panel on its side hissed open, revealing an interior bathed in a soft, internal luminescence. And then he emerged. He wasn't what the dime novels depicted. No bulging eyes, no green skin. He was tall, impossibly slender, with limbs that moved with a liquid grace. His skin was the color of fresh cream, almost translucent, and his head was smooth, devoid of hair, perfectly sculpted. But it was his eyes that held me transfixed. They were vast, pools of deepest indigo, shimmering with 1,000 unspoken thoughts, a universe of sorrow and wonder. He moved with a fragile uncertainty, like a newborn foal finding its legs. He wore a garment of interwoven light, shifting and flowing around him. As he stepped onto the grass, he seemed to absorb the twilight, his form almost blending into the deepening shadows. He didn't see me at first. He stood there, turning slowly, taking in the whispering corn, the distant farmhouse lights, the vast expanse of our Nebraska sky. There was a profound loneliness about him, a palpable sense of being utterly, tragically adrift. When his indigo gaze finally met mine, there was no fear, no aggression, only a deep, aching recognition. He raised a hand, not in threat, but in a gesture I instinctively understood as a silent greeting. I mirrored it, my small, grubby hand rising. From that moment, our lives intertwined. We kept him a secret. My father, surprisingly, after seeing the alien's gentle nature and perhaps sensing the profound vulnerability beneath his otherworldly appearance, agreed. It was a time when compassion was a luxury, but in the face of such a unique being, it became an absolute necessity. We built a hidden shelter in the abandoned root cellar, deep beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak. There, in the dim, cool earth, he lived. We called him Kale, a sound I'd whispered one night that seemed to resonate with him. He learned quickly. Not English words at first, but concepts, emotions. We taught him with gestures, with drawings in the dirt, with the simple act of sharing meals. He absorbed everything, his indigo eyes reflecting our world with an almost painful clarity. He'd watch my father toil in the fields, the sweat beading on his brow, the lines of worry etched around his mouth. He'd sit beside my mother as she hummed lullabies to Lily, his gaze softening with a curious tenderness. He saw the struggle of our lives, the relentless cycle of planting and harvest, the ever-present threat of the next dust storm. And he understood it, not with words, but with an empathy that transcended language. In return, he showed us his world. He had no words, but he possessed a gift. When he touched something, a leaf, a stone, or my hand, he could project images, feelings, memories directly into our minds. He showed me soaring cities of crystal and light, powered by stars. He showed me beings like himself, moving in harmonious ballets of thought and purpose. He showed me a family, standing beneath twin suns, their forms radiating warmth and love, their faces mirroring his own. And then he showed me the fracturing, the sudden, violent rupture that had flung him across the void, a solitary seed cast into an endless ocean. The grief he projected was a crushing weight, a silent scream that echoed in my very soul. I knew then that his journey here was not by choice, but by catastrophe. My sister, Lily, a child of pure innocence, became his closest companion. She saw no alien, no other. She saw a friend. She'd bring him wildflowers, humming tunes she'd learned from my mother. Kale, in turn, would show her the vibrant, singing ecosystems of his home world, filling her mind with colors and sounds that defied earthly description. He became our quiet protector, our silent observer. When a late frost threatened to destroy our spring crops, Kale spent the night in the fields, his body emitting a faint, almost imperceptible warmth that seemed to push back the encroaching chill, saving a crucial portion of our harvest. We never spoke of it, but we knew. The years passed, marked by growing crops and deepening furrows on my father's face. The Dust Bowl years began to settle in, the sky turning perpetually gray, the wind a relentless sculptor of despair. Our farm, once vibrant, began to wither. Hope, like the topsoil, was eroding. Kale watched, his indigo eyes filled with a profound sadness, unable to stop the encroaching desolation of our world, mirroring the destruction of his own. He tried to help, projecting images of advanced irrigation, of methods to bind the soil, but our technology, our understanding, simply wasn't ready. One evening, as the dust swirled outside, creating ghostly shapes against the twilight, Kale came to me. He held out his hand, and when our skin met, I saw it all. He had found a way. A fragment of a ship, buried deep beneath where it had crashed, still held a faint, almost exhausted energy signature. It wasn't enough to send him home, but it was enough to send a beacon. A desperate, final cry across the stars. It would take all his remaining strength, perhaps his very essence, to activate it. He was choosing to use his last spark of hope not to return home, but to simply announce his presence, to perhaps guide others away from this struggling world, or to simply let his people know, one last time, that he had existed. The weight of his sacrifice settled on me. I saw his family, waiting under twin suns, their faces etched with the longing he now bore for them. I saw his home, vibrant and alive, a stark contrast to the dust-choked reality surrounding us. I saw his choice, to burn his last light, not for escape, but for a final, almost poetic gesture of connection. We went out that night, my father, mother, Lily, and I, a silent procession under a sky choked with dust, devoid of stars. Kale led us to the deepest part of the impact crater, now mostly filled with drifting sand. He knelt, his slender fingers brushing the earth. The fragment of metal he sought was small, barely larger than my hand, but when he lifted it, it pulsed with a faint, internal light, like a dying ember. He held it aloft, closing his indigo eyes. The air thickened around him, humming with an energy that felt ancient and profound. The light intensified, radiating from Kale's entire being, not just the fragment. It was a shimmering, blue-white pillar that pierced through the dusty veil of the sky, a beacon of pure, concentrated hope. It rose higher and higher, a single, defiant finger pointing towards the heavens, challenging the indifferent vastness of the universe. We stood transfixed, tears streaming down my mother's face, my father's jaw tight with emotion, Lily clutching my hand, her eyes wide with wonder. The light from Kale was so intense it felt like it was purifying the very air around us, burning away the despair, if only for a moment. But as the beacon reached its zenith, Cale began to fade. His form, already translucent, became almost ethereal, dissolving at the edges, like mist touched by the dawn. The light from the fragment grew dimmer, its purpose fulfilled. With a final, almost imperceptible sigh, Cale was gone, dissolved into the very light he had created. The beacon flickered once more, a final wink from a dying star, and then vanished. The dust-choked sky returned to its oppressive gray, the silence that followed more profound than any we had ever known. We stood there for a long time, bathed in the afterglow of what we had witnessed. There was no body, no trace, only the indentation in the earth where he had knelt, and the deep, abiding imprint he had left on our hearts. We returned to the farmhouse in silence, our lives irrevocably altered. The Dust Bowl didn't relent overnight. It still raged for years. But for us, something had shifted. We had seen a universe of compassion in the eyes of an alien. We had witnessed a sacrifice so pure it redefined what it meant to be alive. My father, who had once worried about every kernel of corn, now looked at the stars with a different kind of reverence. My mother, though she sometimes cried for him in the quiet of the night, spoke of Cale with a gentle, enduring love. Lily, as she grew, always saw the world with a wider, more empathetic gaze, remembering the alien who had shown her the colors of distant suns. I left Harmony Creek eventually, chasing my own dreams, carrying the memory of Cale like a precious, hidden gem. I became a storyteller, finding ways to weave the impossible into the fabric of the possible. I never spoke of him directly, not to strangers. How could I? How could I explain the profound connection, the silent wisdom, the sheer, heartbreaking beauty of an alien who had found a home, however briefly, in the heartland of America? But sometimes, when the night is clear and the stars prick the velvet blackness, I look up. And I see a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the vast tapestry of the cosmos. And I remember the boy with the indigo eyes, who came from the stars and taught us what it truly meant to be human. He never asked for anything, never demanded. He simply existed, observed, and loved. And in his quiet, tragic beauty, he left behind a light that, even after all these years, continues to burn within me, a beacon of hope against the endless dark. A reminder that kindness, compassion, and the silent language of shared humanity are the most powerful forces in the universe. And that sometimes, the greatest stories are found not in words, but in the echoes of a touch and the memory of eyes that saw galaxies.
Like and subscribe.